Thank you for staying with us. We're still talking about the health situation in the country. Now, the Institute of Human Virology in Nigeria is a non-governmental organization addressing HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and other infectious and non-infectious diseases. It is involved in developing infrastructure for prevention, treatment, care, and support for people living and those affected by these diseases. The institute, established in 2004, is known for its contribution in building laboratory infrastructure, promoting good laboratory practice, providing technical expertise to ensure quality laboratories, and training medical laboratory scientists. The institute has established specialized laboratories like 17 PCR laboratories across the country used for early infant diagnosis of HIV and HIV viral load tests. Others include a biosafety level 3 laboratory for diagnosis of multi-drug resistant TB at the National TB Leprosy Training Center in Zaria, in collaboration with the National Tuberculosis and Leprosy Control Program. But today they join us, Professor Alashle Abimiku, who is the Executive Director, International Research Center for Excellence, Institute of Human Virology, joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us, Prof.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we've reeled out what your institute, that's the Institute of Human Virology, does and all of that. But tell us again, why should the institute why should we come to you at this point in time?
So obviously, everybody talks about COVID-19 at this time. It's an RNA virus. It's devastating the whole nation. It's made a terrible impact globally and has been detected in Nigeria, as you know, and we've got quite a few cases, up to 81. Fortunately, we've got very few deaths, and a few have recovered. But COVID-19 is an RNA virus, similar to HIV, which is an RNA virus. So a lot of the infrastructure that we set up really helps in building the capacity within the country to know what you're dealing with. So I hear a lot of talk about reliable tests that we need to do. The infrastructure that we've built is to ensure that any test that is done in Nigeria is reliable, is an international standard, and we will know where we are. So for HIV, for instance, the ability to detect an infected individual, put the individual on treatment, and then check and see the level of the virus is important in monitoring that individual. So it's for their good health. Some of the platforms that we've set up across the country, the PCR platforms, as you've heard, for COVID-19, the test is PCR based. So some of those platforms that we've set up through the support of the U.S. government for HIV detection and care gives us a heads up to begin to use similar platforms for COVID-19. But of course, we have to make sure that we continue to care and monitor the HIV-infected individuals, because quite frankly, they are also one of the vulnerable people because of their immunocompromised state. So in brief, that's why it's highly important to have those infrastructure, not just to have the infrastructure, but to be able to depend on every test that comes out of those tests, because you've had well-trained individuals and you're using international standards.
So, Abimiku, the COVID-19 that's, as you say, you talked about, and everyone knows, it's plaguing the whole world. And yes, we have cases here in Nigeria, and there is this thing about some level of fear that it's going to spread. Indeed, there is that fear that it might have actually penetrated beyond the numbers already being quoted by the authorities. But because they've not been tested, they're not really talking about that. So how would you advise, or how would the Institute advise that this spread be curbed in the country?
Yeah, I was listening to your earlier panelist or guest, and they covered very, very nicely some of the recommendations that have come from the government already. The fact that right now what you and I can do, every single Nigerian can do, is social distancing, washing of our hands, and making sure we protect our loved ones, especially grandma and grandpa, the ones that are very vulnerable. We're very careful about that. So in that regard, everybody can do something in terms of limiting the spread of COVID-19. Now, obviously, like you rightly pointed out, we may not have the right figure in terms of what we have in the country because testing is limited. So therefore, I think that the NCDC, the Minister of Health, and a number of philanthropists that have come to the aid of the government are really doing the right thing, but it's not enough. So I would like to see a situation where every state in the country, it has a testing center. Every state in the country is utilizing the number of trained staff and healthcare workers within the state. Every state has a call line, or they're doing their own communication process where they inform people very, very clearly on why there should be social distancing, why everybody should work from home, why you cannot open your stores and interact with several people that you don't know where they're coming from, why you can't have a packed bus like before in transporting people. So every state should be able to do that. Every state should be able to use its human resources that have applied the technology of PCR in looking at all the viruses to really be able to support the federal government in the testing that is happening right now. It's easier for a state or individuals within the state to call their primary health physician, for instance, than to try and get through to NCDC, because really, quite frankly, NCDC should be dealing with emergencies, because apart from COVID-19, they also have to deal with Lassa, yellow fever, whatever outbreaks that is circulating within the country. So in as much as the federal government gives guidelines, the states should have a structure that supports their individual, give information in a very structured way and deliberate way over and over and again to the different populations, so that together with all of those efforts, we can cope this pandemic. I am very, very impressed to see that some of our philanthropists in Nigeria, I understand that Dangote is leading a whole crop of billionaires, millionaires, rich people that are bringing resources together to help the efforts of the government. That is great, but we mustn't forget other groups that must be coming together at this time. There should be a task force that is looking at all of the platforms we have within the country, and that is advising various governors and the federal government in terms of how to use it effectively, to be able to distribute the test so that those who really require this test get it. There should be a community that is putting together the appropriate information that should reach every Nigerian, no matter where they are, so that they understand that this fight is not really a one man's job. It doesn't matter how much money you have. We've seen really rich nations like the United States of America struggling with this. I mean, having over 100 deaths in 24 hours with everything that they have. So that kind of health infrastructure to deal with the complications of COVID-19, to have the respirators and ventilators are not there. So we really have to have the right groups of people that are putting together guidelines and are helping to inform. I heard one of your earlier guests talk about what you should do when you are at home, what you should do to release stress. We should have psychologists also advising everybody, this is what you do to prevent it. Because sometimes, because of the lack of knowledge, you are fearful. And really, this is not a time to be fearful. This is a time that you need to be well informed and to take informed decisions to protect your family and the rest of the world.
Okay, if I may come in here, you said something earlier about testing being limited. Is it a question of the amount of laboratories that there are? For instance, it is said that there are about 5 molecular laboratories in the NCDC network that are carrying out the tests. So, are these enough? Is that why the testing is limited? And can some, maybe medical laboratory scientists, help out in ways, other ways than beyond these laboratories?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the 5 are not enough at all. They're not enough. Every state should have a couple of testing sites. Because one of the things that we have to consider is the fact that we must prepare for when it hits. When it hits, we don't have the time to begin to put up laboratories. This is the time we need to do that. And 5 is not enough. 5 is in the network that is addressing all other things. So what we should be doing right now is mapping, ensuring that every state has 1 or 2 testing labs that they can carry out this test. They have human resources that are already trained in anticipation of the tests, of the workload that would come their way. So the other limiting factor, as you know, is having the number of tests, even to do the testings, even when you have the platforms, because of course this is a big need across the whole world. And every country is still struggling with having enough tests to do that. And I think that the Africa CDC, working with the WHO and a lot of the goodwill that is coming internationally, is making it possible for African countries to begin to get this test. So let us have a situation. It's all about preparedness, honestly, because the countries that have done well so far are the countries that have taken this really seriously and prepared for what is inevitable. Whereas, as Professor Abayomi was saying yesterday from Lagos, that we would like to flatten the curve and limit the number of individuals that are infected by doing everything that we're supposed to do. But it is really important that to do that, to get enough testing, to get the people that need to be tested, we have to now prepare and use and make sure that we've got testing sites in every state, make sure we bring in all of our trained laboratory technologists and scientists within the country, work with the Medical Science Council of Nigeria that has the whole database in terms of trained technologists within the country, train them in anticipation of doing all of this tests for COVID-19, because unless we do those tests, we really are groping in the dark. There are some challenges like the tests that I mentioned, but let's do what we can right now. Let's not depend on 5 testing sites within the country. It's not going to cut it.
Of coordination. You've talked about testing sites in every state. As we speak, almost every state here has 1 or 2 universities owned by government, not to talk about the private universities, and almost all of them have science faculties. This is beside the laboratories that the Institute of Human Virology already is running. How about coordinating all of this to ensure that this test you're talking about are done real quick? How that work?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we need to do. One of the other challenge that we're going to face is sample referral. So, if we don't coordinate and use all of the laboratories and all of the infrastructure and all of the talent and all of the human resource we have within the country, prepare that through coordination, like you said. We will not be ready. And I'm in total agreement with you that, yes, IHVN has put up 17 PCR sites, but there are laboratories within teaching hospitals that other NGOs have set up, and they've got trained personnel. That's really important, that we've got trained personnel as well that have used this technology for HIV and that can adapt very quickly to using the same technology, the same platform, because it's literally just amplifying the virus genome to the point that you can detect it using the same platform. So at least let us know that there's that coordination.
Sorry to interrupt you. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll continue that conversation around coordinating the laboratories across the country, the margin of errors, who determines that, and what can be done by this personnel, as you say, that are spread across the country. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Professor Bimiku is in our Abuja studios, and we're talking about the laboratory situation and limited testing and possible solutions. Professor Bimiku, you were talking about how to coordinate all of this. If all the states are able to come up with laboratories and the universities and the teaching hospitals are able to open up their laboratories, the personnel that are trained and graduated from each of these universities also brought in and trained for this particular situation, as you said, in preparation for what's likely to hit. You say that things would be different, but the Institute of Human Virology of Nigeria can also play a major role in all of this. I mean, you have 17 PCR laboratories already, but you also have a kind of laboratory called a repository laboratory. How would that also make a difference in all of this particular? Biorepository laboratory.
Just acknowledge the fact that the U.S. government has been very generous, because they have invested in most of the laboratories that I'm talking about. The one that IHVN has established all over the country, all over the nation, the 17 PCR labs, and the biorepository that I will talk about in a moment. So the U.S. government has been very generous, because what they've done is to build the infrastructure to support HIV-infected individuals. But now, they've allowed us to coordinate all of that resources to also support the country for COVID-19, not neglecting the HIV-infected people in a very coordinated way. So you are absolutely right. IHVN has provided a lot of support to the government of Nigeria, and is in a position to help coordinate this effort. Both nationally and within the states. The states usually must be encouraged to also have their own coordinating system, and then we all link up and network together so that at the federal level, they have information of whatever is happening within the state. So this is something that IHVN has done in the last 20 plus years, building infrastructure of high quality within the country, training resource personnel to be able to do things at international level within the country. So IHVN is very willing, and we have made it very clear to the federal government and the coordinating bodies that we're here to serve the nation. And we've been to 1 or 2 meetings already. But I just want to emphasize the fact that this coordination should not just be happening in Lagos or in Abuja. It should be happening in every single state. And I believe that is a little behind. And and we need to improve that coordination, and we have to bring the right parties together to help do that. The fact of the matter is Nigerians are very resourceful and willing to work. IHVN, in anticipating the importance of knowing where you're coming from, where you're at, and where you're likely to go, again through the U.S. government, have invested a significant amount of time, effort, and funds in establishing what we call a biorepository. And basically what that allows you to do is to store biological samples, whether it's serum, urine, plasma, stool, swabs, whatever it is. You're able to store it at very high quality over several years. So IHVN, through U.S. government funding, has been able to set up a biorepository that has been running for the last 7 years. This biorepository has had power 24/7 because what you want to do, again, like I said at the beginning, is have infrastructures, practices that compete with the international world. So we've got samples because your test is as good as your sample is. So this biorepository is really important. So you can imagine a scenario where now, if we had biorepositories of samples from different parts of Nigeria that has been stored through the years, we could go back to these samples and begin to test. Did we have COVID-19 earlier on? Or is there any other viruses that has been circulated? So we can use biorepositories as intelligence. And because this structure for the last 7 years has really supported a number of research activities that have happened in the country and has allowed Nigeria to be part of the international world when it comes to testing vaccines, doing clinical trials, or doing any research, IHVN has now put up a twin 8-floor story building, and 4 of it is dedicated to laboratory infrastructure, and the whole of the floor of that building holds a biorepository that is capable of storing several aliquots of samples. So what we want people to know and to support IHVN in this is the fact that we've got biorepository now that we can begin to store samples that are coming out of individuals that are probably infected, exposed to COVID-19, that would allow us to go back when everything is settled and do the appropriate research on the samples and understand what happened in our own population. So that's why biorepositories are absolutely critical. At the time that you are addressing the pandemic and limiting its spread, you also have the capacity to store these valuable samples that you can go back to later on and ask about COVID-19, ask about every other thing that you are unable to do at this stage. And that's what helps us build our research for things that are local to us. For all you know, Nigerians might mount up a different immune response to COVID-19. You won't know until you're able to do research activities on that. We can't do it now, but we certainly can collect and store the samples. So it's really important we know that we have that kind of resource, and to support IHVN as it develops this new building. I have to put in a little plug here for IHVN because they're doing so much, and I hope that individuals will support them as they build this infrastructure. Not only do they build this infrastructure, but they use all of their staff, for instance, to help the government build a similar infrastructure. And we have actually supported NCDC to set up a biorepository for the meantime to store samples that they have, but we know that they don't have the capacity, and IHVN is providing that capacity and will support any state that want to set it up. But we do want people to support IHVN as they set up this twin building that is also going to continue to support the country, because one thing that we do and do really well at international standard is research that is important to understand our own sets of pandemic or epidemic, and to have the opportunity to give young Nigerian scientists the samples, the infrastructure, and everything to conduct research when we're done with COVID-19, so that we're ready for the next hit. Because, like Bill Gates said in 2015, the biggest threat to the world are viruses. These outbreaks are going to continue to happen, and the better we're prepared for it through research, the better we are armed to deal with the next outbreak.
I like the fact that you talked about collaborations with the NCDC and the government in order to get all of this together. But you also talked about international accreditation and interventions in certain laboratories in Nigeria. Is a Human Virology Institute working in collaboration with the NCDC and the government authorities to use these laboratories even at times like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. The first thing IHVN, Dr. Patrick Dackham, the chief executive officer for IHVN, did was to really reach out to all the institutions, the government institutions within Nigeria, and mention the fact that we have the expertise within IHVN to support a number of things that the government is doing, and also to prepare for the kinds of things that the government at the moment, government and facilities that are working on all of this at the moment may not be able to address. Things like research and other things that we need to put in place now so that we can conduct the research later. So IHVN it's very known by the Ministry of Health, by NCDC, by a lot of states where we have also set up similar infrastructure. We've worked very, very closely with the National Medical Science Council of Nigeria. We have supported them to ensure that just about a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to a luncheon where the state minister actually launched their facility that is now internationally accredited to oversee the quality of work that is done across the nation. And IHVN supported them in training their staff, in setting up the infrastructure to be able to do that nationally. We do it for all of the laboratories we set up, but we also see the benefit of working with government at the national level to make sure that other laboratories also benefit from the expertise that we have and the knowledge that we have already established through working with partners. We really believe for most of the research that we do, we work collaboratively with academic institutions. For a nation to really grow, you've got to recognize that we have to work collaboratively. And so I like to see the federal government at their level do a more coordinating function where they are getting all of us together and getting all of the infrastructure that we have to help us cope with this, whether it's at the federal level or at the state level or at the local government level or even in your own little village. We can make a difference there.
Prof, just before we let you go, tell us about the Research Center, International Research Center of Excellence. How would that help in research into infectious and non-infectious diseases?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like I mentioned earlier on, the Institute of Human Virology really appreciates the fact that there are certain services that we must provide to our people, but we see that also as a very important segue into research. The fact of the matter is that unless you research into the conditions within the country, you are unable to provide local solutions, for instance. And so the International Research Center of Excellence, which I direct, is one that looks at infectious diseases and non-infectious diseases, with a lot of emphasis on viruses, being a retrovirologist myself, to see, how we can improve the care that is brought to the people in Nigeria through the research that we conduct. So the research center has, again, collaborations with a lot of the research institutions in the country and the universities, especially tertiary universities, where we have set up. We have done work on HIV mostly, but we've also set up structures like that you would need when you want to conduct a clinical trial. So I heard the NAFDAC director talking about the fact that we would need to do some clinical trials to understand whether chloroquine plays a role or not against COVID-19. Well, that's something that we can easily do because we have a clinical trial unit that can do any clinical trial at international standard. The important thing with clinical trials is that it is independent, it is totally unbiased, you have a control arm, you have an experimental arm, and you bring the data to bear. It's very transparent to show that this works or that doesn't work. So that the center also, one of the things that the center is doing is really building the capacity of young Nigerian scientists to be able to conduct research, write grants, get funding, and do research at international standard. Let us also begin to contribute to cures, to new findings, to discoveries. There are lots of Nigerians like myself that are abroad. We spend a significant time abroad, but I spend my time utilizing the information that I have there to make sure that we can address problems that we have in country, and it's a model that actually works because there is need for international collaboration. U.S. does not exist in isolation. What happens in Nigeria would eventually impact U.S. So it doesn't make sense for me, being a Nigerian, a professor in the U.S., looking at things that concerns U.S. It's more beneficial for me to look at diseases in my country and bring my U.S. colleagues to also contribute to it. So instead of brain drain, we're getting brain gain. And we are also building infrastructure for the young Nigerians to be able to do research in their country. The reason I left the country in 1991, I've been in the U.S. for that period of time, but working on Nigerian diseases, Nigerian HIV subtypes, was because I could not conduct any research. And I said to myself, if I ever got an opportunity to leave this country or have an opening, what I'll do is create the infrastructure in this country so that young scientists like myself who come up I don't mean I'm young, but I was before. But young scientists coming up now will not have to leave the country. They can stay, they can do their research, and they can publish. They can use international standard because we want to compete with the rest of the world. So we must stay with the international standards and go anywhere in the world. You find Nigerians excelling. And I think that it's important that we bring this back home and we establish that standard and are able to do the kind of research we need to do for outbreaks that come up later. We can't have people researching on COVID-19 and telling us whether chloroquine works or not. We've got a different population. We've got different genes. We've got different makeup. We need to be able to do this within our country, but we have to do it using international standards so that when we publish the findings, it's acceptable across the world. So that's what the International Research Center of Excellence is about at the IHVN.
Thank you so much, Professor Alashile Abimiku, Executive Director, International Research Center of Excellence, Institute of Human Virology, Nigeria. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your exquisite results and ideas with us today.
It's been a pleasure to speaking with you. Make sure you stay safe.
And you too.
Practice isolation.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Sunrise will be back in a moment. Please stay with us.